Patrick, and warm welcome to you all. I hope it's a bit warmer than here in southern Bavaria for most of you and less rain. So as Patrick said, my talk is about the big question, Qt or web. Which one should you use and how much will it cost you if you use either Qt or HTML5? And I prefer web because, well, in the end, it's some web technology. It doesn't need to be HTML5, can be React Native, Angular, whatever. So that's the comparison. So now imagine that you're starting a new project. So you want to develop an embedded system. Say you want to develop a medical device, a printer, a home appliance, TV, set-top box, or well, the more well-known things like an infotainment system or a terminal in a tractor or harvester, an in-flight entertainment system. So the things you see on the left-hand side. And as you probably know already well, the volume of these devices varies widely. So you're talking about hundreds, well, a few hundreds of, say, harvester terminals. You're talking about well over 1 million home appliances. Or if you look at infotainment systems, well, that will be millions, hundreds of thousands, depending on the car manufacturer. So it's a wide range from a couple of hundreds to a couple of million devices. And these devices all run on different hardware, some on very, very powerful hardware, which have nearly desktop performance, some on very low-level hardware. And so you want to develop such an embedded system. And of course, what you want is a great UI and a great user experience. So typically, my customers tell me, hey, we want an iPhone-like user experience. That's the specification for the UI and UX. Pretty simple. Well, you get out your iPhone and check whether you're doing the things right. So now the question, and that's the one I will answer in this webinar, is should you use Qt or web? And to make things a little bit more challenging, your legal department tells you, hey, you are not allowed to use Qt under LGPL version 3 or under LGPL because the legal department doesn't get its head around GPL licenses, or it just doesn't like it. So that means on the Qt side, you can only use Qt commercial, no other way. So you have to pay a certain fee for per developer and per device. On the web side, well, it's typically BSD license or MIT license, so it's free. At least it looks free. So the situation you're facing when you are selecting your HMI and application framework at the start of a project looks pretty much like this here. So on a first superficial glance, web looks much, much cheaper than Qt commercial. So we're talking about a commercial Qt license. So you have no costs if you use web technology, say AngularJS or React Native on a Chrome browser or the Blink rendering engine and Linux. €0 or dollars. If you build the application with Qt, well, you have to pay Qt euros, a certain amount of euros per device. The sales trolls will be happy to tell you how much exactly, but it's a couple of euros. So if it were Qt under LGPL, well, the scales would be balanced because it would be €0 there as well. So it doesn't look really good for Qt, at least on a first glance. But the whole thing is actually wrong. And it's wrong when you consider the costs for your hardware, for your system on chip. Then, and that's what I will show you, is then the scales will change and Qt will be much, much cheaper than using web for your embedded system. So what I have to prove is now, or what I will show you in the rest of the talk is, well, I have to prove that you can achieve a good user experience with web only on a quad-core Cortex A9 or something more powerful. So you're talking about a device which is more powerful than an iPhone 4S, for example. And I will also have to show you that with Qt you can achieve the same user experience on a less powerful and a less expensive system on chip. So you can do the same things on a Cortex A8 or an ARM11. So ARM11, think Raspberry Pi. And the bad news for web and the good news for Qt is nothing much will change in the next years. So Qt has an edge and it will keep it. So the first thing I will do now is do a very quick recap of ARM system on chips. So what is this Cortex A9 and A8? How much does it cost? And what are some example devices? Because I guess not everyone is sleeping with some ARM hardware under their cushions through the night. And I have lying a couple of these around me right now. So, quick recap of ARM SOCs. Let's start at the top. Some of the more powerful 64-bit SOCs. It's a Cortex A57, 53. It's used, for example, in a Renesas car M3 system, and it's used for the infotainment system in premium cars, or Samsung Galaxy 6, or the Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi actually is only, I think, a quad-core Cortex A53. And if you're looking at a volume of 1 million, you're paying something like 60 euros per SOC. Just 60 euros for the SOC. That's quite a lot of money. Going down to 32-bit, the Cortex A15, which you will find in middle-class cars in, well, this year in 2017, you're looking at 37 euros. Further down, the Cortex A9, and that is now the Cortex A9 and Cortex A8 are now are the two SOCs which we will use throughout the talk. So Cortex A9, the typical example is a quad-core Freescale or NXP IMX6. It's used in many, many devices. So you find it in the iPhone 4S from 2012, actually. You find it in middle class, in the infotainment systems of middle class cars dating from around 2013. By now, well, they use more powerful and more expensive things. And you find it in the state-of-the-art agricultural terminals for tractors and harvesters in 2017. So they move much slower than the car industry or the mobile phone industry. And you're looking at something like 21 euros there. The Cortex A8, so for example an IMX53 from Freescale NXP, you find it in premium ovens in 2013, in the Nest thermostat, the iPhone 4, in-flight entertainment systems, or older agricultural terminals. So you're looking at something like 10 euros. And that's actually, in this talk, I will show you that you can run Qt applications on a single core Cortex A8 with the really good user experience, but you cannot do the same for web applications. For web applications, you need at least a Cortex A9 quad-core. And so you probably see now where this is going. So it's about the price you have to pay for the SOC. So if you have to use a Cortex A9 for a web application to get a good UX, user experience, then you have to pay 21 bucks. But you can do the same for a Qt application with 10 bucks per device. Going down a little bit, you have the ARM11. That's even a different architecture. The typical example is the Raspberry Pi 1. The very first one came out with that, and you pay a little bit less than €5. And so, yeah, you can run Qt applications very, very well on the Raspberry Pi 1. So that has been demonstrated many, many times. And finally, an ARM9, well, that's a pretty old SOC, but yeah, you could build VoIP phones with that, or the Nintendo DSi is built with it, and it's pretty cheap with €3.50. So it's just, well, the two in the middle, that's the ones we will be looking at. And I will now show that, well, web applications don't run on anything less than a quad-core Cortex A9. And the first example, first thing to show is that, yeah, so, well, that's exactly what I just said, so good. Seems I know my slides. So, web requires at least a quad-core Cortex A9. And the first thing I will show you is, well, there are very few high-profile web applications. So I did a lot of digging, and well, the only infotainment system I could come up was the one of the Porsche 918 Spider. That's written in with web, but they probably have an Intel Core something. A processor in the Porsche. So that's what Porsche usually does. So it's not exactly a typically embedded system. And then you will find that a lot of third-party apps are written in HTML5. Third-party apps for infotainment systems. So think your parking app, your Spotify app, or yeah, these things, or iHeartRadio, or internet radio apps, and so on. That's written in HTML. Then you find, obviously, you find Netflix. Netflix is written with web technology, not anymore with standard HTML5 and CSS, but something different. But we'll see that in a minute. The Orange Livebox, it's a set-top box by the biggest French telecoms company, Orange. That's written with HTML5. And then again, you have a lot of third-party apps. But you have probably tried quite a few of them. So, or at least, well, I did that. So I have a so-called smart TV with third-party apps. Say to watch catch-up TV or do some video on demand streaming, and in my opinion they all suck, and I haven't used the TV apps I think for 5 years, and by now I'm using an Apple TV to do all these things. And well, there the apps are written natively, and I think it's not really a surprise that you find so few embedded web applications, because none of the web frameworks says, well, I'm made for embedded. Not at all. They all say, like Angular, well, it's for mobile and desktop. React Native only says, well, it's for mobile apps. And nobody talks about embedded systems. So that's not their target. And that's actually what, well, Facebook learned the very hard way. So Facebook was, and well, certainly still is, a big proponent of web technologies. And their initial Facebook app was written in standard web technology, highly optimized. They have really good developers at Facebook. They know what they do. But in 2012, Mark Zuckerberg had, well, admitted publicly on a tech conference in San Francisco, well, web doesn't cut it for the Facebook app. He had to admit, well, we burned 2 years developing the iPhone app and Android app with web technology. So that's a couple of millions of dollars they wasted and a couple of person years just burned. And Facebook's consequence was, well, throw away the web stuff and do it natively. I think they are using quite a bit of React Native now, even in their mobile apps, but the main frame is still native. And that was 2012, and it's interesting to see on which SOC they failed. It was an iPhone 4S, which was not good enough for a web application. And that's a dual-core Cortex A9, 512 megabytes of RAM, 800 megahertz, a very powerful GPU. So it's a pretty powerful SOC you have in there. And we all know that Apple knows how to tune and optimize chips. So, and even on this device, it wasn't possible to get a good user experience. The problems are the typical problems, I think, with web applications. So high memory consumption, scrolling and animations aren't smooth, touch tracking is lagging behind. So your finger is far ahead of the UI element you're dragging, for example. And it's incredibly hard to find the reasons why things aren't the way they should be. So the debuggers, profilers are wanting or missing. So tricky stuff there. That's the Facebook story. So they actually abandoned web for native. The Netflix story is slightly different. So they are, well, they are sticking it out with web. So they went all in with web and they stuck with web. And they have actually a very interesting problem. And I think Netflix is even the more interesting case than Facebook. They have a huge fragmentation. Just think, so the Netflix app must run on a huge range of SOCs, like TVs, set-top boxes, Blu-ray players, and DVD players, smartphones, tablets, PCs. So that's a very wide range. So typically from some, well, nowadays Cortex A8s. 5 years ago there were still some ARM11s and below, and up to Cortex A15s probably. I'm not sure whether they use 64-bit SOCs by now, because, well, they are expensive, and TVs, set-top boxes, that is an industry with razor-thin margins. So you don't spend 60 euros, 80 euros just for your SOC if you can get away with a cheaper one. So they started in 2009 to 2014 with a hybrid Qt WebKit approach. So Qt WebKit allowed them to actually access the system resources through some C++ plugins. And it was actually the Qt department at Nokia at that time who helped them to get started. And the user experience was mediocre, if I'm polite, well, and it was actually pretty awful. So they learned the lesson. In around 2014, they felt the heat of the competition. So think of Amazon Prime Video, Hulu, Apple iTunes. They all were offering video at that time, and they had a better user experience. And so they had to do something. And what they did is they wrote their own rendering engine fully in JavaScript. So it's called Gibbon. It's proprietary, so nothing you can scrounge from them. And they also, well, they started to rewrite their HMIs in React. At that time, there was no React Native. And then they optimized and optimized and optimized and created their own language, which is a bit similar to what React Native later became. And what they actually, the optimizations are something like, well, minimize the use of HTML and CSS as much as you can, and write basically everything in JavaScript. So there's only a very thin, minimal skeleton of HTML and hardly any CSS, because these two are the performance killers. Or that's what Netflix identified as performance killers. And the results on the SOCs is, well, on something like a Cortex A8, they achieved 30 frames per second refresh rate, 110 milliseconds response time. And yeah, it's much better than before, to be honest, but it's still not a great user experience. So you see the occasional stuttering in animations and scrolling. The response times is a bit on the slow side with 110 milliseconds. So you could do better. But they are helped by the fact that the SOCs, SOCs in TV set-top boxes become more and more powerful. So you're talking of at least, I think by now, Cortex A9 or even more powerful SOCs. So yeah, it's okay. But keep in mind, they invested a lot of money and time to build their own rendering engine, and you are only allowed to write HMI code in a very, very specific way, highly optimized for their rendering engine. And that is all proprietary, no chance to get your fingers on it. So they spend a lot of money, time and money, and the point here is, well, you can achieve the same thing with Qt for less dollars. So why invest such a lot of effort if you can do the same thing with less effort? And that's now the transition to Qt. So my point is that you can achieve the same or better user experience on a single core ARM Cortex A8 or even an ARM 11. So something like the Raspberry Pi 1. And well, I think I just let the real-life products speak for themselves. So if you look in the car domain, you will find 7 of the top 15 car manufacturers are using Qt for their infotainment systems. So the ones that went public are Tesla, for example, and Daimler. Daimler went public on the Qt World Summit 2017, some weeks ago. So they are using Qt throughout their car lineup. And there are many other pretty well-known manufacturers there. There are 2 OEMs for electric vehicles. Tesla, I mentioned, and Rimac. They are both public, so they have no problems talking about that. And there are at least a dozen tier 1 suppliers who have Qt-based infotainment platforms. Among them, Harman and Panasonic, for example, Magneti, Morelli. So so that's quite a lot. So actually, the infotainment market splits into systems built with Qt and systems built with EBGuide, which is also some native HMI and application framework. And that's it. There's no HTML, no web in there. Nobody would use it because the user experience must be perfect. That's the brand of the car manufacturer. So you can't, well, you can't get away with it's good enough. It must be perfect. If you look at the agricultural sector, you will find one of the top 3 manufacturers who uses Qt for all its terminals everywhere. The new standard Isobos terminal is built with Qt. Krone uses it for its corn harvesters, Ropa for its sugar beet harvesters, and there are many, many more. And actually, the Krone terminal is built with the Cortex A8, for example, running very well. If you move over to in-flight entertainment, well, Panasonic is using Qt, and another one of the top 3 OEMs is using it. And this other one uses Qt on a Cortex A8 as well. If you happen to fly Lufthansa from, say, Europe to the US, then you will most likely use one of their systems, so you can see for yourself. Then Qt is used in the fitness equipment, and it's used for home appliances. So Electrolux uses Qt in its home appliances, so far in its premium appliances, but it will be moving it down. And there is this ominous Ham, home appliance manufacturer, who is also mentioned in the white paper. It's a big one, and they were actually the ones who asked me to come up with an evaluation between Qt and web technologies, because they were in exactly the same situation that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. They had to decide which HMI framework to use. And well, they saw, well, Qt will cost me a lot of money and web is for free. But they had the gut feeling that technically Qt is the better solution. And that's where they brought me in. And by now, well, it's all well. They have decided for Qt. So, okay. By now it should be, well, should be pretty clear, and I hope it's a solid argument so far that, well, for web you require at least a quad-core Cortex A9. With Qt you can achieve the same thing on cheaper hardware and less powerful hardware. And now, how will things look, say, in 3 or 5 years? Because this is what a company like Ham or like you, if you have to decide, okay, which framework to use now. So that's a decision for the next 3 or 5 or even 10 years. That's not a decision you want to change in 3 years, because that really costs you money, as Facebook has learned the hard way. So, and the point I will make is that nothing will change anytime soon. So the situation, you need a more powerful and a more expensive SOC for web applications than for Qt. That will not change anytime soon. And Qt is far ahead of the pack. So the first point is Qt uses much less RAM, flash, and probably even power, starts up much faster than web. And here are just some numbers to show that. So if you look at the Qt installation, say Qt 5.9, And it's a release build. Debug symbols are stripped out. It's built for, actually the numbers are for an Intel x86 64-bit Linux system. So the Qt 5 web engine core, well, comes in with a whopping 103 megabytes. As a comparison, the two libraries you need for QML come in at a pretty meager and tiny 8 megabytes. So, okay, good. Then I looked further, checked out the Chromium browser on the same Linux Intel system, 42 megabytes. So, well, the web engine is linked in statically, probably a lot of optimizations, so you save quite a bit of space. So 42 megabytes. Yeah, well, that's the Chromium browser. That is not even the application yet. So it's just the vehicle in which you run your web application, and that's still 5 times bigger than the QML engine. So you're looking at 5 to 10 times bigger. The startup time of the Chromium browser and the web app is 11 seconds on a Raspberry Pi 3, which is a pretty powerful system already. It's 11 seconds until you can interact with your application. And that's thanks to the guys from Sequality, from Austria, who actually did a technical comparison between Qt and web. And well, that's their numbers, so they tried it out, 11 seconds. Well, in this time you can start up the complete Linux system with a QML application on an IMX6 about 9 times. So it takes 1.25 seconds to start Linux and your QML application on a less powerful SOC than the Raspberry Pi 3. It's quite amazing. And it's, again, if you look at it, well, you can certainly optimize, well, the QML stuff on the right-hand side is optimized. Absolutely true. But it doesn't take much time, say, to get to a Linux system with a QML app to boot in less than 5 seconds, or even less than 3 seconds. That's pretty easy. You don't have to be Superman to do that. On the left-hand side, well, you will have to fight to get the 11-second startup time for the browser and the app, say, down to 5. You will have to invest a lot of time and money to get that down. And so, again, the question is, so why should I invest a lot of time and money in web if I can have the same thing with much less effort for Qt? So why should I do that? And if you look at the power consumption, so that's measured on a MacBook. So that was a script simulating reading web pages until the battery died. With Safari, you can the battery lasts 5.5 hours. With Chrome, it lasts 3 hours, 40 minutes. So that is much less. And Chrome is the browser you will be using. Now you may say, well, battery doesn't, or power consumption doesn't matter that much. Well, actually, it even matters for mains connected things, devices like home appliances, because you only get a AAA rating if you really minimize your power consumption, and that also involves your touch screen and your system on chip. So have fun doing that with Chrome. It will be tricky and it will cost much more. Sorry. Similar situation if you look at compilation. So you probably all know that for you can compile QML at compile time, so at build time. So you compile QML, the QML compiler compiles QML into C++, and then you compile that C++ code into assembler code. And you do that during build time. And just by flicking a switch in QMake, you get 30% faster startup times for your QML application. And this is actually, well, I tried that myself, so I measured that myself. That's really true. That's amazing. Just an option for your build scripts and you're 30% faster. Amazing. And that is the holy grail. That is where, well, that is where web wants to get. And yeah, there are some efforts with the WASM, so the web assembler, so where web is compiled into assembly code. Yeah, but that's still in its infancy. And yes, there were a lot of speed ups for just-in-time compilation for JavaScript over the last years. But hey, the QML engine, and which also uses JavaScript, well, they can do exactly the same optimizations than web does. They can actually profit. They can just scrounge these and well, use them. So it's a bit like, well, Qt is already there, and even if web can at some point catch up, they just caught up. So it's a bit unfair, but yeah. So Qt, that's actually the point here. So Qt is often there, or you can achieve things with very little effort, very little money you have to invest, and for the same thing you need a lot of time and money on the website. Okay. If you look at the rendering flows, well, the QML flow is really optimized for OpenGL acceleration. So QML is mapped pretty directly on a QML scene graph. That is fast. And then the QML scene graph is pretty similar to an OpenGL scene graph, which you can accelerate with your GPO in a very nice and optimal way. If you look at the rendering flow for web, you see first, well, you have to parse HTML and you have to parse CSS. So you have two parsing steps, and then you get a DOM tree to which you apply the CSS rules, global CSS rules. So every CSS rule can change your DOM tree. That's a global manipulation. So these things, so the parsing of the two files and the applying the CSS is pretty inefficient. And now you understand, I guess, why Netflix said, well, minimize the use of HTML and CSS as much as you can, and you best do not use CSS at all. So that makes your DOM tree very small, as small as possible, and then you don't have these global manipulations of your tree, and you get a slim render tree. So that is what Netflix did. And from the render tree down to the layout tree and the display, that's pretty much the same as on the QML side. So that's well, just 3 reasons why I think that well, Qt is well ahead of web, and it will not change anytime soon. And I even doubt at the moment that web can achieve the same performance or the same user experience as Qt on Cortex A8. It cannot. So that's what I showed so far. And that finally leads us to the new scales, which now are tipped in favor of Qt. So we just figured out that to run a web application with good to great user experience, you need at least a quad-core Cortex A9. The quad-core Cortex A9 costs you 21 euros. On the other hand, you can get with Qt, you can get away with a single-core Cortex A8. That costs you 9.80 euros or 10 euros, and then you have to add the Qt license costs per developer per unit. That's a little bit. And then the difference, you see there is something like 11 euros minus the Qt license fees per unit. And the thing I can tell you is, well, the Qt license fees are a fraction of the 11 euros there. And if you want to know the exact amount of money for the Qt license fees, you have to talk to the salespeople from the Qt company. They will happily tell you, and they are nice salespeople, so they won't be on your back for the next 5 weeks. They understand if you tell them I'm not interested or I'm interested, and be sure you get a very good deal. So web is much more expensive than Qt if you factor in the hardware costs. And I haven't even shown the costs for more RAM, for more flash. There are not the development costs figured in. So you have to spend a lot more money for web because during development to get, well, closer to Qt. And actually, the prices here are for a volume of 1 million. It actually scales down to a couple of hundreds. That's where you would reach the break-even point. But even then, you shouldn't blindly choose web, because then you are talking about additional optimization costs, development costs, and so on, which you have for web, and web still doesn't scale down. In a home appliance, you don't want a Cortex A9. You are happy if you can use a much cheaper one. So that's the thing you have to keep in mind. And yeah, what this shows is, I think, pretty obvious. So if you multiply that by 1 million, well, you can easily save something like 5 to 8 million euros. If you have only thousands, you at least save a couple of thousand euros, and you get quicker to a result than with web. So that's the point I wanted to make here, and now I'm open to questions. Well, before we start with the questions, the hint for the white paper, so that's all written up in a nice white paper. And of course, I want to thank you for listening in, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And I want to thank the Qt company to make both the webinar and the white paper possible. It has been fun so far. So now shoot with your questions.
With almost perfect timing, look at that. So let's have a look. I think Niels asked, if a Raspberry Pi costs $35, why would its CPU costs $60? I think that question was asked during the relates to your comparison of ARMs.
Yeah. So the Raspberry Pi 1, the Raspberry Pi 1 costs, what was it?
I think he was talking specifically about the Raspberry Pi 3.
Okay, that's a good point. So I think I stand corrected there. It's, if you look at if you look at a consumer grade, well, the point here is the prices are the 60 euros are for the R-Car M3, which is an industry grade SOC. So an industry grade means, yeah, it has to withstand a wider temperature range and maybe more vibrations and maybe even a bit of water, and so that makes them more expensive. The Raspberry Pi, you are right, that is much cheaper, but it's a consumer SoC, and it's, well, it's an example of a Cortex 53. That's, I think, all. So the price doesn't apply to all the devices there, but to the SOC which is listed in the second column.
All right, then we have Ken, who asks regarding Netflix. Have you ever performed a proactive approach where we would take a poor product and develop a solution built with Qt to show the client developers and management what is possible? Do you know of any such cases
so
you have worked with?
Is the question so that they started with web and then figured out, well, it's not that good, so we switched to Qt, and
yeah, this seems to be the gist of the question.
Just thinking. No, so personally not. So no, I don't know of any cases. But I'm pretty sure there are. Well, I think the thing coming closest to that is the comparison that that Equality did. They took 160 hours to implement an application with Qt, and 160 hours to do the same with web. And then you can judge for yourself what the result is, the quality is. Just look at their demos. And you can also see how far they came in the 160 hours. So they came much further than with Qt than with web. But no, I don't know of someone who has changed from web to Qt.
Let's see, then we have Sebastian. He asks, hi Burkhard, regarding startup differences and best practices or limitations. I think he was asking about if you should use QNX or a stripped down Linux to have good startup time, how that would perform.
What about startup time differences and number? OS. Yeah, well, my experience with QNX, for example, is that it's you're starting with a much faster startup time than with, say, a Linux system. So you have to do less optimization, or you get something, I think, like less than 5 or even 3 seconds, pretty much out of the box. For QML and Qt applications. And then the last mile, or getting it down to, say, 1 second, then you have to invest a bit. But QNX, the company, will help you with that. So it's worth considering whether you are willing to spend some money on QNX, and you will get a lot of optimizations for that money. So similar to Qt, actually, the QML compiler is only available on the commercial license, so you spend some money and you get an immediate 30% speed up. Okay, that's quite good, I would say.
Another question by Sebastian and also by Pedro. We talk about development time. Pedro writes, I agree that Qt seems to have the advantage in hardware costs. But how about software development time and cost? in particular C++ developer cost is higher than JavaScript developer cost. Is there any data on this?
Ooh, data on this. That's good. Always a tricky question. Well, I think, at least I hope that I made the point that you will have to spend a lot more time for at least, well, optimizing things on the website, so you get better software right out of the box with Qt. So that's what you save. Quantifying that, tricky, very tricky. I don't really know. Let's hang on. The replay guys. I had a chat with with Chris something from Replay, who uses Qt for game development. They have a platform for that, and he said that, and they first did it with HTML, so that might be actually also an example for the first question. So he said that QML is something like 1.5 to 2 times shorter than, say, React Native or Angular, these things. And, well, React Native is much shorter, for example, than standard web HTML5 CSS. So 1.5 to 2 times shorter, that's quite a bit. That also means you have less bugs in your code. That means you write the code faster, and that hopefully answers your question a little bit. And with the C++ developer cost is higher than JavaScript developer cost, well, it's not that easy. First of all, you would, in an embedded system, you typically will use QML for development, and probably QML developers are still a bit more expensive than JavaScript developers, but I guess cheaper than C++ developers. And even UI designers often can write QML code. So it's probably not that difficult. And on the other hand, you cannot use a run-of-the-mill JavaScript developer for embedded development, because that's a total different animal than desktop development. You have heavy resource restrictions where you do not care about on desktop. So the Netflix guys actually said, well, the typical desktop on which you develop, on which they develop the UI, is about 400 times more powerful than the devices on which they deploy the HMI. And you will be hard-pressed to find good embedded JavaScript developers. That's when they become pretty expensive, and that's actually the experience that Netflix made. So they were really struggling to get good web developers, and they paid very good money. So it's the sentence there is not true if you look at embedded development.
Chris then asks, is there a way to make a Qt application run in a browser?
Probably there is. I think you could try that with WASM. That's what someone told me who is involved in the WebAssembly development. So that could be a way to do it. But I don't, well, the advantage I could see is that then the application is sandbox, so you don't have to develop these access restrictions, or you don't have to develop a sandbox for a Qt application on your own, because that's provided by the browser environment. So that could be an advantage there. But that's where I would look, so WASM.
What do you mean by QML's native compilation? Silva asks. You talked about QML's
Yeah.
native compilation in the middle of, yeah.
So there's in the commercial version of QML, there's a so-called QML or Qt Quick compiler, and this compiler compiles QML and JavaScript. So QML also uses JavaScript into C++ code, and then the normal C++ compiler compiles that into assembly code. And this is not yet fully available in the LGPL version, but it's well, it's getting closer and closer. You have some caching mechanism for the LGPL version, where you run your application once, and then things are compiled and cached. And when you run it a second time, it uses the compiled stuff from the cache. So it's pretty good speed up there as well. But it's converging anyway. So I think in a couple of releases we'll have a Qt Quick compiler in the free version as well. But that's not for me to decide. Just my guess.
Okay, then we have, I think, this one and then one more. That's all we have time for. Oh, I like this one by Ken. Are there any cost comparison breakdowns for tiered volumes? Obviously, SME markets don't sell 1 million units when manufacturing devices and instrumentation. So if you don't go all out 1 million units, what the breakdown would be for lower volumes of production, I assume.
So that's if you look into the white paper, you find a table which gives you the SOC costs for 110,000 units. So then you can use these numbers and some interpolations between the numbers to figure out how much does an SOC for you cost, or you go to say some websites like Mouser is a good one. They give you some prices for SOCs, and then you know the SOC cost for your quantity, for your volume, and then so you know how much this costs. And then you ask the sales guys at the Qt company how much the Qt commercial license costs for this number of units. And then you can do the computation calculation yourself. Then out drops the difference, and you know how much more expensive one or the other is. And so, as I said, so I mentioned that already. So if you look, the break-even point will be around 300 to 500 units. And then you are looking at a technical comparison. So then you can argue on, then you are looking at total costs of, say, 50,000 or so. So that's not much, or even less. And then you can compare things on a technical basis, and then you have to figure in things like how long does it take you to develop it with Qt or with web, how much time do you have to spend for optimization. So that's the important things then.
And there is Carl asking, how did you get that lovely whiskey voice, Mr. Host? Well, I was actually going with a voice modulator that made me sound like Optimus Prime, but instead of using Qt, I used HTML. So there's that. So this is about all the time we have today. If you have any more such questions as the ones maybe we have ones we didn't go over, please send us an email to info@qt.io, and we will answer them for you, or visit our website, qt.io, and there you'll find all kinds of useful information. So yes, thank you all so much for joining.
Yeah, sorry. And of course you can also contact me. So my email address is on the slides as well, so as you see fit. Sorry, Patrick.
Yes. Of course, where can people reach you, Burkhard?
Yeah, on my email address, it's given there, burkhard.stubert@embeddeduse.com, on my website or on LinkedIn. So whatever you prefer, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining, Burkhard, and taking the time to talk to all of us.
Was my pleasure.
Yeah, so everyone, if you enjoyed yourself, we also have a couple of more webinars lined up for you. The next one would be on the 7th of December, that is a Thursday, and will be about pointer handlers for fluid applications in Qt Quick. So if your application needs gesture support, check that out. And until then, I wish you all a great evening, day, morning, wherever you are. And until next time, goodbye, Burkhard. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, and have a good time.